Heavy metal rock.
Global mind.
Today I'm speaking with Joe Satriani in advance of his release for his new CD, Elephants of Mars, coming out April 8th. Joe, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today at My Global Mind. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
We've spoken before, so it's really exciting to always talk to you for your upcoming releases. Thanks again.
Yeah, it's really great.
So after your 18th studio album, how do you never run out of inspiration for writing emotional and impactful songs?
Well, there's life, you know, life keeps coming at us. It's just crazy. I think definitely the longer you hang around, the more emotions seem to run higher and higher, and they pile up. And, you know, I think you're supposed to be able to gain perspective on life as you become older, but actually things get more confusing. I guess it's because you can never anticipate the complicated nature of life and the unexpectedness of things that happen, good and bad. So I try to put all of my reflections into music, and then see if I can put them all together into one record that'll be, you know, truly entertaining and uplifting and maybe thought-provoking.
I think you nailed it with this one. There's a tremendous amount of diversity between the songs, and even diversity with the different playing techniques within each song. You've done some crazy things with the guitar. What song would you say is most out of the Joe Satriani box?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, that's anytime I get asked a question about, you know, commenting on the way that I play, I'm sort of immune to it. I just don't know. I mean, this sounds silly, but I hear myself play all day long, every day. And I have since I was 14 years old. So it's like, I hear myself play in a million different styles. I hear all the mistakes. I'm there witnessing when I just keep trying and trying and trying. So yeah, I don't know. By the time I put out a record, I'm really focusing on telling the story of that song. But when I hear people comment on it from the outside, I go, oh, that's really interesting. They're hearing me in a more clear way, whereas I just I can't put my finger on what I sound like or my style.
I heard a lot of Middle Eastern flair in some of the songs. You think that's the case more than you've ever done before?
Might be. I mean,
yeah.
There are some of the albums get a little where I'll concentrate that kind of stuff on one particular song. I think in a way, like the first two albums, Not of this Earth, Surfing with the Alien, they had quite a lot of exotic sections to them and songs that crept up again on the eponymous release in '95 and Engines of Creation. Certainly Strange Beautiful Music, probably the most diverse album that I put out. But I think, you know, to one extent, you can add a world music view to a performance that's stuck onto a rock song or a blues song or something. Or you can write a piece like Doors of Perception, where the whole thing is going to sound exotic to the Western ear.
Right.
You know, to the people across the pond, it's going to sound normal to them. So it's all relative, right?
That's a great response. You're a very melodic player. Tell me about balancing technique and melody, and if you ever have to put technique aside in order to get more melody out of it, out of a song?
Well, the first thing is, I think that the idea of successfully playing a melody requires an enormous amount of technique. The musicians, I think, have failed the general public by not coming up with terms to describe what everybody calls technique, right? The word technique has this bad connotation, like if you have technique, you don't have something else. But that's silly. You can't actually play any instrument unless you have technique. So how much technique, you know? So it would be like you're trying to say, well, Steve Vai has technique and so does Neil Young. They can't play each other's songs unless they have some level of technique, you know?
Yeah.
So we're not really talking about technique like it's one thing. What we're talking about is, in the world of technique, I think what people are really saying is, out here, you know, in fanland and in the world of listeners, normal people, we get confused when there are too many notes, when things are too complicated.
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to, unless the composer has really done their work well. And what my favorite example is Flight of the Bumblebee. The Flight of the Bumblebee is such a successful composition, and it requires that the person playing it has an enormous amount of technique, right? Yeah. And how can you say that's a bad thing, right? How can you say that that is somehow not soulful? You know what I mean? I mean, you think about it. A composer is looking out their window and they see a bumblebee and they want to somehow capture the feeling of the fluttering of this bumblebee, even though it's a large insect, little wings. And they come up with this great sound. But then he's got to find musicians who can do that, you know? Yeah. But once it's played, it sounds like so much fun, especially if you're a kid and you see it as part of a cartoon, you know what I mean? Yeah. So none of the negative attitudes towards technique, you know, versus feeling ever come up. And so let's say if I'm saying to myself one day, I'm going to listen to my recording of my new song Faceless, and I want to see if I've played it correctly. Everything I do, even when I play one note, requires a technique. It's so diverse that I would bore you to death if I told you all the techniques involved in getting one note to sound like I've played it perfectly. That's my world, and I don't want to bore the audience with that. But in fact, I am involved on a microscopic level with the playing of every single note. And the slower it is, the more space around it, the more difficult it is. And if I'm playing like Flight of the Bumblebee speed, there's no time for the audience to say, is that a good tone? Is he ahead of the beat or you know, behind the beat a little bit? You can't tell because there's too many notes. It's too fast. But when you have a slow piece of music, everybody could tell if you're doing it right or not. And so you really have to bring in more technique to do these slower things. You see what I mean? I know I'll always have a hard time describing this to people, and I apologize if I'm going on.
No, it's great. Very insightful.
But I get that a lot. I get that a lot because people just assume that I'm technique crazy and I can never explain it. It's like a loaded question, you know?
I think people think like the average guy could play bar chords, they could play a solo, they could play notes, but then you're far more proficient, you know, and you could play different techniques and different styles. And I think sometimes we hear so many guitar players, the melody gets lost in the notes, in the overwhelming, in sometimes progressions. Yeah. So we always think the average guy thinks of it as a balancing act. It's either, you know, Living After Midnight or, you know, some sort of crazy Dream Theater song that's impossible to, you know, sometimes digest. So yeah.
Yeah. But
you seem to do well.
It is in fact the composition. It has nothing to do with the technique. And I can tell you, I have played the simplest songs with John Petrucci on stage in front of thousands of people. Right. And we've enjoyed it. I mean, he's a fabulous guitar player and a wonderful human being. And he's perfectly capable of playing the simplest things and making them sound great. Oh, yeah, so when you hear music, actually what you're hearing is the personality and the composition it's not really the technique. It's just they've decided to make it sound like a barrage of notes and very complicated. So it's not the fault of the technique. It's their fault.
Yeah, yeah. No,
You know
that's
what I mean?
insightful. I get it. That's insightful. You know, you mentioned my favorite song, Faceless.
Oh, great.
That takes me soaring to another place. And it's the one that I wake up in the morning and it's in my head and I go to bed. Particularly, there's certain parts. Tell me about the creation of that song and the sequencing order on the CD, why you put it there.
Well, I wrote that song on piano, and it came very quickly. I have a setup where I can sit down at the piano and record as I write right on the spot, and I can get from the beginning all the way to the end. I'm not a really good piano player, but I can handle enough of the notes, and then I'm imagining the melody in my head. So when I go back and I start to add the guitar, I have the memory of this imaginary Joe who always plays the right notes. And I try to remember that version of me rather than the guy that could play more. I think, no, remember that guy that was really feeling like nobody can see them. No one can see the real person, and they're dying to be embraced by that singular person they're trying to reach, or society, or they're just feeling like they have no face, or perhaps he can't even recognize anybody anymore. So
Right.
So that really helps me during the writing process. Then when I sit down to play, I just say, stay there, stay in that place where your heart was aching and you were reaching out to people, you were crying out, about this sad feeling. Then of course, as it moves on, we have to get to work as professional record makers. So we have to make decisions. That Kenny wants to know, Joe, what would you like me to play on this? And Brian and everybody, they want to know, well, how are we supposed to play on this? And it took a lot of work. We had time on our side. There was no clock on the wall that maybe say, by 3 o'clock, I've got to wrap this up because we got to do another song. And there was no date on the calendar that said we have to hand this song into the record company on this date. So we were able to, I was able to take my keyboard part and Ray's keyboard part and have them exist together, because over a series of weeks, we could talk to each other, even though he was in Australia or Tasmania, about how we could make it more subtle here and really big there. And Eric could, get the idea to put an orchestra on it, and the idea of writing a different section in the middle to have a moment where the subject, the guy is thinking like it's happening. I'm beginning to see the face before it all falls apart again. Those things were really fun to do from the record making process. There's a little thing in the beginning where once we finally figured out that my piano part in the beginning was the lick, and by making it more like a piano player wasn't going to help the song, we decided to just add some guitars, and I wound up combining about 6 or 8 guitars to create this sort of, George Harrison, Aerosmith kind of little bit. It only lasts for about 5 seconds. But for Eric and myself, we just thought, oh, that's perfect. It sets up the lonely guitar so well,
That's
so
a great song.
We really enjoyed doing it. I mean, we love making records, and this getting not having a schedule really made us feel relaxed enough to with each other to keep throwing ideas out. And so the amount of collaboration really made each song really shine and become more unique, so it would stand out as a unique thing on the album.
Fantastic. Like I said, I've been listening to that probably the most.
Wow.
Do you guys have to talk to your other players and say, I'm trying to evoke this emotion? Do you have to do the setup like you just did for me for Faceless and
Yes.
explain so that everybody is on the same page and thinking, this isn't a rock song. This is, you know, something a little different.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, perfect example is the leadoff track, Sahara.
Yeah.
I had this idea back when we were going to do a vocal album and a instrumental record, simply as like a free supplemental set of recordings that we would put out for our during our resumed shapeshifting tour.
Yeah.
That's when we thought we were only going to be sidelined for 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months. So once those plans changed, the song took another turn. But when I wrote it very fast, I made a quick recording of it. I kind of imitated a guy singing. I wrote all the lyrics about this guy who I imagine was like John Lennon and Jared Leto, whatever, walking down desolate New York City streets in the middle of the night, and there's nobody there, and he can't find anybody, and he feels so empty inside, and he's just spitting out all of these sort of stream of consciousness feelings about loneliness. And this is funny, okay? And then he gets visited by a female deity, and she says to him, "Love is the answer." And so he starts to scream it, but he doesn't believe it. And he's really angry that that's what this deity has told him, because he goes, you know, he's thinking, how's that going to help me? Like,
Awesome.
I'm in the middle of this desolate city. There's nobody around. There's no future. How can love be the answer? So you can imagine, I send these lyrics to Ray and I explain to everybody, I'm so excited. And everyone's like, I think Joe's like going off the deep end, you know? So the song like died in the band, and we put it over on that pile over there, which is, well, some other album, you know?
Yeah.
And a few months later, when we decided that you were just going to do one instrumental album and it was going to be a brand new album, Eric said, you know, that song Sahara, I think we should do it, but you've got to figure out how to make it an instrumental. And I was like, how do I get all that emotion from those lyrics into a guitar melody? I mean, that's really hard. I mean, they're two different animals, you know, a vocal song and an instrumental. But I love the groove and the feeling of it. And so I just worked with it. It took a couple of weeks to figure out how to make it really evocative. And the only thing that I repeated that was from the vocal melody was the breakdown, where he's repeating to himself. He's saying, everything's going to be all right. Everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be all right, just like it was before. And he's just trying to, like, he's hoping that if he says it enough, that everything will go back to normal. You know what I mean?
Awesome.
And so I kept that in there. And then what really helped actually was Eric came up with something really beautiful. The whole song was recorded, and he said, you know, I think what's missing is when you play those last melodies, perhaps let me see if I can add some chords underneath you. And he created the descending bass line in there, and it really just like, wow, that opened the whole thing up. And that's, you know, it's like, it's funny when you don't have words, you need some other device to give a reference to your instrumental melody, and so you need some other instrument or harmonic structure to be like an interval space between the two. And once Eric came up with that, and then of course Greg's mix is just phenomenal. You know, it's really, really beautiful.
I'm excited to go back and listen to the song with what you just explained to me. So, and hear if I could pick it up and get the sense and the feeling that you just expressed. The press release mentioned that you're doing a limited run of 7 double-sided cards with original artwork representing each song. So from what you told me, do you do the painting after the song, or are you doing the artwork and then it inspires the song, or can it work both ways?
Oh, this is even stranger. Trying to explain it. So yeah, during the last 10 years, I made a transition from sketchbooks and digital art into art on canvas. And just this past weekend, I was in Miami attending 2 art exhibitions, but very first I've ever done.
Right.
Really bizarre. Talk about a fish out of water. You know, being in an art gallery and seeing my paintings everywhere. It was pretty crazy. But as we were moving along with the production of the album, and earMUSIC wanted to do something really special for the fans, they knew that I had been painting like crazy, you know, for the last 2 years. And so they said, maybe there's some way to get the two things together. And I sent all this crazy artwork to our art director, Todd Galapo. And, you know, the problem is that he had already designed the album cover, the incredible logo. We had all the photos in there. Everything was perfect. And my artwork doesn't really fit with it at all. So we didn't want to introduce something that was going to be a conflict with the whole idea of Elephants of Mars, you know. So, but what he did was he was looking at a series I did of mixed media with prints that were generated by the Scene 4 Art Collective, where they took photographs and they took colors from my previous canvas work that was all weird faces, portraits. They combined the two, they printed them on canvases, sent them to me, and then asked me to put alien themed kind of stuff on top. Mm-hmm. And so I did a lot of this thing that we call alien writing on it. And for some reason, Todd really focused in on the alien writing, and he was able to take little snippets of the alien writing and make these cards and then put them on top of these photographs that relate to the album cover and the album package. So it was yet another mixed media collaboration that was able to create something new. And it's when I look at them, it's really kind of spooky in a way, because, you know, it was art that was created not with this in mind, and yet somehow, what I did was I wrote the paragraphs about each song, mm-hmm. and I sent it to Todd because he didn't know what the album was about, and so I sent him the tracks, and I sent him these paragraphs, and so he looked at them and he went, okay. You know, this is what, you know, like the story about Sahara, or, you know, the lightness of Bluefoot Groovy or something like that. And then he went looking for alien writing that seemed to be in an abstract way, and to him only, a representation of these stories I sent him. So it was really fun. I mean, I love that. I love that kind of collaboration.
I'm looking forward to seeing it when it's printed or released. So that'd be fun. I know Corey at Scene 4. I've done a lot of interviews for his artists too. So he's a good guy. So yeah. I love mostly drummers, because they always have the drums going and the light sticks and
yeah. That was we had a lot of fun with the guitars. I mean, yeah, really, really great. I mean, they have been, you know, Corey and Robbie. I mean, I have to thank them for introducing me to Christian at Wentworth Galleries. I mean, it's something and it was just by accident. I mean, we were taking a break from their crazy photography, and I just happened to pull out my phone and say, oh, you know, I do these things too. And they were like, whoa, we got to do something with that, you know?
That's awesome. You know, I live in New Jersey, and right by Short Hills Mall, there's a Wentworth Gallery in there, and Rick Allen does his artwork there. Are you going to be coming around anytime soon to New Jersey?
Yeah, I think the first week in March, we're doing a show there. Yeah. I'll
come by and I'll introduce myself and say hello.
Oh, good.
That would be great. Yeah. Do you have time for a couple more questions, or are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I've got nothing.
This is a two-pronged question regarding your music and your art. Do you find yourself creating something adequate one day and then extraordinary the next?
Presumptuous for me to say that I create anything extraordinary.
Oh, you do.
I like the concept. I find that working on music and painting is equally exciting and anxiety ridden, you know. Like, you know, you've got a painting and you think this is going to be great, and then you go, oh, I wonder if, you know, if I put on some you know, raw umber, it's really going to look great. And you put it on there and you go, oh, that really sucks. And it's like, can I wipe that off? Like, how do I do it? At least when you're recording digitally, you just push stop.
Yeah.
And the Command Z, and it's like no one ever hears it, you know. So yes, I mean, it's really interesting how with painting, because things dry and they change as the paint dries, and you at night when you finally say, I have to turn the lights off, and I just have to stop working, and the next day you wake up and you're like, oh, do I really want to look at what I was painting yesterday? And you're always surprised, because sometimes you go down into your studio, and like I do, and you look at it and you go, oh, that's actually really cool. Or you go, oh, that is definitely bad. It's like, I got to do something else. And I think it happens in music as an art, at least for me. But being able to work privately, for me, is really great. It reminds me of being a teenager and, being left alone by my family to make as much noise as I wanted to, even though they could hear it and they're thinking, oh, this guy's never going to get any good. But, all beginners suck. I mean, it's just, we all start at the same spot. But I think as you become successful, you begin to feel the pressure of everybody watching you all the time. And unless you're really young and you've grown up with social media, it's a bit of an annoyance, for people to always want to see and watch everything that you're doing. And I prefer still being private during the periods where I'm actually building the piece, the song. And it seems like my best work comes from that,
It's great.
Until it's entirely different. Like, I hate the in-between, but when you're on stage in front of people, that is so wonderful. That's like one of the best things you could ever do in life, is to share music with people live,
That's great. Funny thought, I do a lot of photography, and I shoot concerts. And, I was at the G3 concert when you played in Newark, was it 2018? And just in general, I come home and I download the pictures. I go, these all sucked. I screwed up. This was wrong. This was wrong. And to your point, I go back months later and I go, oh my God, this wasn't as bad as I thought. I could just tweak this here and tweak this there. And it really comes alive and it makes all the difference in the world. But sometimes you have to take yourself away from it. And I totally understand and respect that aspect.
Yeah, it's expectation and comparison.
Right.
They're equally the thief of joy. They can spoil it for you, and you miss the point.
Yeah. And sometimes it takes you a little while to get to that point, and that's cool. The other funny story is that I made that that's Eddie Van Halen guitar back in the background.
Oh, cool.
And it doesn't play for shit, but it looks cool. But it was a learning process. To you saying can I wipe that off? I had to learn the difference between the paint can of acrylic and the paint can of latex, and the one makes the other bubble up, and it was like, so here you are, you got a perfect guitar, and it's all of a sudden you spray the wrong thing on it and now it's peeling up. And that took me like 4 or 5 times to realize latex, acrylic. I'm not a painter by any stretch of the imagination, but that was just my perspective.
It's true. I mean, we did 11 guitars for the Wentworth Gallery collections. And because of supply chain issues, the gallery had to buy right off the factory fully assembled, tuned up guitars and send them to me for painting. And what I had to do for the first time in my life was to disassemble very carefully all the guitars, and then sand off all the finish, and then prep, and then start with the artwork. It was crazy. But yeah, you learn things, about what goes with what.
That's a lot of work. Sanding the paint off the guitar. Oh my God.
Yes, yeah. It was dirty, messy work. And but yeah, it took a lot of time. But yeah, it's kind of a meditation, and it's a bit nerve-wracking when you screw up.
Yes.
But, yeah, it was fun. By the time I did the last guitar, I felt like I had learned so much about the instrument itself.
That's interesting. And one of the things that I learned from just making that guitar was there's no such thing as perfection. You're not going to get the stripe exact. You're not going to get, it's just not possible. And that really set a tone for me in life too, that there's no such thing as a perfect situation, a perfect picture, a perfect, any piece of music or whatever you want to look at it. But you say, I think I got it to the point that it's really good and I'm happy with that. And I think that's, that helped me in life. Believe it or not, making that guitar, I look at things differently in life now. And I say, there's no such thing as perfection. And
that's true. Eddie proved that, this guitar. So here's a perfect example, right? This guitar here, this is an Eddie.
Yeah.
This is one of the low cost Eddie guitars, right?
Right.
And I have to say, it's really kind of a lousy guitar. Gary Brower was able to, put a kill switch on me, and he installed the Sustainiac. We tried to get a better bridge. I mean, the bridge it comes with is really terrible. I mean, compared to the Ibanez Edge, it's like a budget thing,
Yeah.
So you have to get the top of the line Floyd Rose bridge on there. But here's the thing, that this guitar, Eddie's first one that we saw, actually was the same as the yellow one. In other words, he just kept repainting it and changing the neck, and everybody thought he had new guitars, but actually it was the same one.
Right. Yeah, the red and black one was he painted over it, right?
Yeah. So it was very interesting. He obviously didn't care about perfection.
No, and that's a good way to look at life. Sometimes it's just you're happy with it, it makes you happy, and leave it as well enough alone.
Yeah.
My last question for you is, when we spoke in 2020, right before that album came out, Shape the Thing, the president banned international travel because of the pandemic. You were one of the first artists that I recall to start canceling shows in Europe, and we actually had spoken like right before the announcement had come out, and you said hold off on sending this out. Have you given any thought to when touring will be right for you again?
I'm not really sure. I know I'm pretty confident that come the fall, the US tour will be on completely.
Cool.
I'm waiting. As literally every day there's calls going back and forth with agents and promoters and venue operators in Europe to see if the April 1st European tour is actually going to happen. At issue here is not really this playing on the stage or the safety of the audience. Those things have actually kind of been worked out, and the problem for us is, for 9 weeks, 15 people traveling on tour buses every night, there's no way to protect us from each other, right? And the fact that we have to interact with strangers every single day, 50 shows, 17 countries, it's crazy, And if we stop once, if we get stopped and it's in Bulgaria or it's in Oslo or Madrid, we don't know what the restrictions are going to be. Will the tour have to stop for 5 days, 7 days, 14 days? We don't have any extra people. I can't just get a new drummer, a new bass player in 24 hours. So it winds up being this economic disaster if we get stopped. And if we do get stopped, then all those shows while we're in quarantine get canceled for good. It's just a nightmare of, you talked about 2018. On 2018, within a week of that G3 tour in the US, we all got pneumonia and bronchitis. Like we would walk on stage some nights, everyone was on the strongest antibiotics you can imagine. Wow. There were nights where Phil could not open his mouth. He couldn't even talk to the audience, let alone sing. But we never missed a show. Right. No one had to be quarantined, and so as musicians, we're used to this. You've got a stomach flu or you can't breathe, whatever, you can still do the show, and you're not, putting the rest of the tour in danger of death, but this is entirely different. And so not only are we trying to protect each other from a potentially lethal virus, but we don't want to completely create a financial disaster that will take another year or two to get over. It's just nuts. So this has been our problem. And I've had like a lot of conversations with Sammy Hagar about this, and what he's done. He's got a private plane. He does about 2 or 3 shows a month. Mm-hmm. He plans nothing in advance like I do, and of course he doesn't do 6 shows in a row every week, like we do, because he's singing, and you can't do that. You're vocalists. So he's able to do that and keep safe because he keeps everything really simple. the Rolling Stones can afford to have separate dressing rooms for everybody, separate limousines for everybody. And they, again, very few shows per week. And when they get on stage, the audience is way the hell over there. So, it's a maintainable bubble. And that's the problem for the smaller bands, is that it's really rough to maintain that bubble.
I get it. When you're ready to come to, and I get it, when you're ready to come to the US, I'm looking forward to seeing you. I remember 2018, you were showing pictures, you had a crack in your finger, remember? And it wouldn't heal.
Yeah.
And that's New Jersey, that's January to February. You get a crack, it doesn't heal in your finger because it's always so cold. So yeah, I get it.
Wow. And we used to do the song Energy as the first song that has some of the highest notes you'd ever want to write in a song, right at the beginning, and all of a sudden, first song, blood. I have to go through the whole set, not like the last song, but it was always the first, and it was, oh yeah, that was rough. I didn't, it wasn't until we got to, I think, Albany, where a doctor finally put some silver nitrate on there that started some kind of healing, but it stayed for the whole tour. It never fully healed until the tour stopped, and we had a few weeks off before going to Europe. So
yeah, I remember the picture. You sent the picture on Twitter or something like that. Well, Joe, I want to thank you so much. It was a fascinating interview, and I always enjoy talking with you. And when you come to the Wentworth Gallery, I'm going to stop in and say hello and check out your artwork. So I'm really
please do.
I will. Thank you again. I really enjoyed it.
All right, thanks.
Have a good day.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Heavy metal rock.
Global mind.